before ethnic cleansing began in Bosnia, it had already started in Kosovo. Since at least February 1990, Serbian police and paramilitary units have brutally repressed Albanian strikes and protests. The Serbs have closed Albanian schools, courts, and newspapers. 60,000 Serbian army troops have reportedly turned Pristina, Kosovo's capital, into an armed camp. Some 2 million Albanians make up a large majority of Kosovo's population, 85 to 90%. Yet they no longer have the right to study or even to have street signs in their own language.
And it is our conviction that human rights are indivisible, that the violation of human rights of any group or any individual, for whatever reasons, ethnic, religious, linguistic, cultural, are human rights violations that ought to concern all of us. The most distinguished chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, has arrived, and I would like to call on him first to make whatever observations he would care to do so. Senator Pell.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy and hospitality, permitting me to speak and run. But like you, we all have many commitments. I think that Yugoslavia is experiencing a very difficult time, and there's a real prospect, as we all know in this room particularly, that one or more of the republics may end up seceding. In this situation, you would think that the last thing the defenders of the unity of Yugoslavia would want to do is to stir up ethnic tension in Serbia, which was the core around which, as I understand it, Yugoslavia was built. Yet that's exactly what's happened. The Serbian government, acting with substantial support from the national government, is brutally repressing human and political rights in the autonomous province of Kosovo, which is 90% of the population of which is Albanian. And I can remember myself being there on the shores of Lake Arkrid, near the area of Kosovo, and seeing and realizing that the people around me were Albanian.
It gives me great pleasure to call on a distinguished former colleague, most effective former member of the Executive Committee of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, who has fought for human rights on many continents and in many different situations, and who has taken such a prominent leadership role on this issue, the Honorable Joe DioGuardi.
Mr. Chairman, I see our good colleague, Congressman Hank Brown there, and I'm wondering whether or not he has other business, and I would be happy to defer to him if he has a statement.
I'll be most happy to call on my friend and colleague from Colorado if he would like to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suspect I will learn a great deal coming after our former colleague, so I will defer.
Thank you very much. It's all yours, Congressman DioGuardi.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, for all you are doing for oppressed people all over the world. Some of my proudest days in the House of Representatives was as an executive committee member of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, serving with you on so many issues, including Tibet and Soviet Jewry, and certainly the issue today in Kosovo. But I'm also very happy today to be still a part of you as a member of the board of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation. And I applaud all that you're doing there as well, and Congressman Gilman and Congressman Hank Brown, and thank you for your support. I have to thank the real freedom fighters today, my dear co-chairman, the people who died. Now, there are hundreds of people who have died, but it's not easy to get information in Yugoslavia, not easy at all. But let's start with the 27 documented cases in 1989 in those demonstrations, and the 34 documented cases early this year in January and February, And let's talk about the Gervala brothers that were killed and shot down in cold blood, along with another civil rights activist, Enver Hadre, and the papers in Brussels. I went there to eulogize him. The family allowed me to go to his funeral. The papers all pointed to the Serbian secret police, believe it or not. State terrorism is alive and well, maybe not in Moscow, but in Belgrade. I was forced to go and testify. I wasn't forced to testify, but I was forced to wear a bulletproof vest when I went to Geneva, and again when I did rallies in front of the United Nations in New York. In Geneva, I went there because Mr. Hadre was shot down because he was ready to deliver to the special rapporteur the 34 names documented. I took those names literally off his body. His wife gave them to me, and I continued that journey under threats, and I had to wear a bulletproof vest. And you've heard the stories from Congressman Broomfield about Peter Iveze. Can you imagine 5 years after a demonstration in New York in 1981 or in Detroit, he goes back and they had his picture, Utbah, and they arrested him and they put him in jail, and it literally took a hearing that I remember you were at, Congressman Gilman and Congressman Broomfield and myself, to get him released. And we have all this good news today. Why all of a sudden are the Serbs so generous? They're letting go Azem Vlasi and the other political prisoners, and they say all of them. I doubt that very much. And they're all of a sudden lifting a state of emergency. We know that is nonsense. We know that they're trying to paper over one of the most oppressive regimes the world has ever seen. Apartheid is alive and well. It now exists in Yugoslavia in the Kosovo province. It is now gone from South Africa, or at least it's going. And Yugoslavia has a Nelson Mandela, or at least the Albanians have, Adam Damace, who was in jail for over 27 years. And Nelson Mandela was released before even any talk of releasing Adam Damace occurred. So I have to thank those freedom fighters that died, and I have to thank the 15 that flew here just in the last 2 days from Kosovo, and believe it or not, threats have already been received. There are security agents and FBI agents back there. Some have to travel in bulletproof limousines already. It's the truth. Now, if this is America, and if we're going to stand up for a system that is supposed to be equal and fair, certainly our government has to take a strong position. And I hope we're not going to be swayed by all of a sudden this generosity that comes on the day of our hearing, when you know they tried to cancel this hearing, postpone it, and do so many other things. Let me also thank those hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 Albanians that listened to me as I made and spoke in your name, Congressman Lantos and Congressman Porter, because you know how hot it was out there. They listened to me, and as like the Pied Piper, they followed me outside, and I said, don't disrupt this hearing. Let it go. It's important for Kosovo. Wait to 2 and 3 hours. Be like Gandhi, like the people in Kosovo. The terrorists are not the Albanians. It's the Serbian authorities. The only ones that are being killed today are Albanians. The only lists of deaths that I see are Albanians, not Serbs. How can they be terrorists? The communists, and by the way, this is the issue. The issue is not religion. If it were religion, what are 1,500,000 Christian Slovenes doing supporting the Kosovars if this were a religious issue? The issue is not terrorism, not certainly Albanian terrorism, because Albanians don't fire back. They've learned to be like Gandhi, to be like Martin Luther King, and literally they demonstrated that today by leaving those halls outside so this meeting could continue, and they traveled from California, Dallas, and all over. And I want to thank those people as well. The continuation of apartheid and the denial of democracy cannot restore political stability either in Yugoslavia or in Kosovo. The United States Congress, Mr. Chairman, has contributed to the liberalization of other countries in Eastern Europe. And I urge that it contribute likewise to the improvement of human rights conditions in Kosovo and Yugoslavia. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much, Congressman DioGuardi.
I have couple of questions.
I would like to suggest that if any member of the panel has questions, if you take your seat, we'll proceed with questions.
Sure.
Congresswoman Bentley.
Mr. DioGuardi, you need to be accurate when you're a witness, especially when you're a paid lobbyist for a group.
I'm an ethnic
now, you
Albanian.
have to be
I'm an ethnic Albanian. I'm an ethnic Albanian. I'm the president of the Albanian American Civic League and the Albanian American Foundation, and I resent those intonations.
All right. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Chair would like to thank Congressman DioGuardi.
May I respond, please, to...
Of course.
Okay. I would like to say this. I don't indict the Serbian people. I don't question Congresswoman Bentley's motives. She's proud of her ethnic background the way I'm proud of mine. And I applaud her that she could stand up for them the way I stand up for our Albanians. And I want to see freedom-loving people everywhere treated the way they're supposed to be treated. But Congresswoman Bentley, the Yugoslav Constitution says that all ethnic groups in Yugoslavia should be treated equally. I think the issue here today is that the Albanians are not getting the same treatment as the other groups, and really that's what this is all about, plus the fact that while communism is on the decrease in Yugoslavia in general, as we've seen with the Slovenian and the Croatian elections, it doesn't seem to be diminishing in Serbia, and that's the problem, because that's where Kosovo is. So let's hope we can all work together. The issue here is to get dialogue. You and I spoke over the weekend, and you said that perhaps we should sit down with Congressman Lantos, and I applaud you for that. I think that we should sit down. I went to speak to Milosevic. He wouldn't speak to me. Now, maybe I'm not the one he wants to speak to, but maybe there are others he should speak to. But how about you and me deciding to meet to see if we can find reasonable voices on both sides, to put them across the table, to finally get equality for everybody in Yugoslavia, because that's the way it is here in America, and that's God's way.
We appreciate Mr. DioGuardi's, Congressman DioGuardi's efforts, not only today but in the past, for his continual fight for human rights, no matter where they may be, whether it's in Albania, whether it's in Yugoslavia, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Ireland, no matter where it is. Congressman DioGuardi has been an outstanding advocate of human rights, and we appreciate his continual efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
My friends, Kosova! My friends, we've all witnessed the changes that have taken place in Eastern Europe. Let us be sure that the same will be happening in Albania. Let us be sure that the forces of democracy are strong enough for the people to be free. And while we applaud the changes in Albania and Yugoslavia, we must continue to be concerned about the Republic of Serbia. I'm alarmed, and we are all alarmed, at the actions which the communist stalwarts have taken to suppress the Albanian minority in Kosovo. We find it outrageous that Albanians are being seriously deprived of human, cultural, and political rights. As you may know, the Yugoslav president announced yesterday that he may soon hold a national referendum to decide if the nation's 6 republics should split into separate states with greater individual autonomy. As the president said, the right of self-determination is a natural political right of each nationality, which no one can question. If this is true for Serbia, so must it be for Kosovo.
You know, it was former President Eisenhower who said back in 1954 that gradually the age-old longing for the humankind for peace will be reflected in better governmental structures that will be forced to comply with the demands of a great and enlightened citizenry throughout the world. Those words spoken by President Eisenhower in 1954 have never been more poignant than they are today. The raging tide of democratization in Eastern Europe makes them even more salient and makes even more important the issue of human rights and political autonomy for ethnic Albanians in the Kosovo province of Yugoslavia. The recent military presence in Kosovo has provided an ominous reminder, a reminder of the repression that comes from ethnocentric attitudes that have no place in our modern society. Last fall, a delegation of European parliamentarians, and I spoke to them, visited the Kosovo province. They visited it to investigate firsthand the human rights situation in Kosovo. They returned from their visit utterly dismayed by the lack of cooperation exhibited by the Yugoslav government officials. They were not even permitted to visit with the various dissident groups, and they were afforded only second-level meetings with the government officials of Yugoslavia. Recent events in Kosovo created an ambience of pessimism. The aspirations of ethnic Albanians of that region have been crushed. Over 50 Albanians have been killed in Kosovo over the last year. That killing must stop, and it must stop now. And I want you to know that in the Congress there are many of us who feel, just like Joe DioGuardi has it so deeply embedded in his heart, that we must help these people who've been repressed for so long. And I want to assure you that many of us will continue to fight for freedom, for justice, for liberty in Kosovo, for Albanians everywhere. God bless.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Kosovo! Free 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 Kosovo, USA! Free Kosovo, USA! Free Kosovo, USA! Free Kosovo, USA! Free Kosovo.
The USA must say very clearly to Yugoslavia that the USA will not give you aid until you free Kosovo. So the cry must be that without freedom, without democracy for the people of Kosovo, that the USA will not give aid to Yugoslavia, and we stand united in that purpose, and this senator will fight any attempt to give aid to Yugoslavia. And I intend, along with my colleagues, to bring this message to the administration, to bring this message to the State Department, because they had better wake up, because it is the Albanians in Kosovo who are being taken advantage of, who are being victimized, who are being deprived, and we will not stand by and allow that to take place and do business as usual. And must be clear in saying to the administration that the rights of the Albanian people who are being persecuted in Kosovo must be protected. It's as important as protecting the human rights of blacks, of whites, of people in South Africa, and people in China, and people in Lithuania. The people of Kosovo cannot be forgotten.
Free Kosovo, and do it now. Free Kosovo! 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 Free Kosovo!
let me say that I'll be, maybe, I can't promise you, but I may be in Kosovo about a month from now, trying to do what I can to make certain go there, as I hope to do, I plan to meet with your brothers and sisters, those who've been denied freedom, those who've been oppressed, and if we can, to meet with those who've been the oppressors, and those who've taken away freedom, and those who've taken away human rights, and stomped on human rights. In a world where every day freedom is breaking out all over, Kosovo should be no exception. There should be freedom in Kosovo. There should be freedom in Albania. There should be freedom everywhere in the world. And if I believe we're fortunate, those of us who live here, Albanian Americans, wherever you may be from, we have democracy, but we want to make certain it's not denied, as I said earlier, to your friends and to your relatives and to your brothers and to your sisters and all the people in Albania, all the people in Kosovo. And I'll do my best, and I'm certain I can speak for many of my colleagues, regardless of their political party, whether Republicans or Democrats. We're in this together. We all either believe in democracy or we don't. And we believe in democracy just as you believe in democracy. And we'll be urging the State Department to take a tougher stand and take a proper stand for freedom and human rights everywhere in the world. Let's stop the oppression. Let's stop the abuse of human rights. Let's stand up for freedom everywhere, just as we stand up for freedom in America. Thank you very much. We'll be on your side.
I raise the issues of Kosovo, what is going on there in human rights. And I think that one of the great causes in human rights in the world today is to help the oppressed people in that province. It's very easy for us to forget about people who are far away. It's very easy for us in our prosperity to forget people who are disadvantaged. And it's very easy to forget people who we don't have an immediate cry from. I know in states such as New York, maybe there are a larger population. I do not have a large Albanian constituency. But I've been attracted to this issue because I think it's a classic issue of human rights. And all of you, by being here, are making a contribution. By your presence here, you are helping me in the Senate of the United States. By your presence here, you are helping Tom Lantos and El D'Amato and the many other people who are working on this issue. I have brought with me, in conclusion, I might say, a resolution that we have introduced in the Senate of the United States. It's Senate Concurrent Resolution 124, relating to the human rights violations against the Albanian minority in Yugoslavia. And it's co-sponsored by Senator Pell, by Senator Dole, my colleague, and by myself, Senator Pressler. And it has been submitted to the Foreign Relations Committee. And it's another effort to highlight the issue in Washington, D.C., because it's important in Congress that we achieve this. It's important that we put pressure on the State Department, and I put pressure on the State Department every chance I get when they're in hearings, when they come before our committee. But I will continue to listen to you, and this turnout tonight has inspired me. Your presence here, your being here, has made an impression on my mind. I must travel off to another city later this evening because I'm campaigning for re-election and I'm very tied up in my airplane schedules. But this evening will stay in this senator's mind. It's an issue I've worked on, but every one of you, through your contributions, through your being here tonight, make a difference. I'm going to present these. I am now going to present to my friend Joe DioGuardi Senate Concurrent Resolution 124 relating to the human rights violation against the Albanian minority in Yugoslavia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Great, we're going to win. Yes.
If we are to bring freedom and a hope and an opportunity for justice to people, to Albanians who seek that in Kosovo today, to those who yearn for freedom wherever they may be, to live without fear of persecution because of their ethnic roots and culture that they want to keep enshrined, then, my friends, the United States of America and you, the Albanian American Civic League, must be successful. The beacon of freedom comes from the United States of America, and we have a duty never, whether it be in Albania, whether it be in Yugoslavia, we were fighting for Albanian rights, whether it be in Lithuania, wherever it be, the United States of America can never be second and must be first, standing for freedom.
Let me just say a word about my very dear friend, about the man who, with his dynamism, vision, courage, determination, eloquence, commitment, has brought about what to an outsider looks like a miracle. Let me pay tribute to Congressman Joe DioGuardi. The man who saved my life was a Christian Swede who sacrificed his life for the sake of people who were suppressed and persecuted. And I want to tell you that in our joint work for human rights, in the Human Rights Caucus and in the Human Rights Foundation, you should have seen this Albanian American tiger fight for the people of Tibet, with whom he has nothing in common except their humanity. So, Joe, on behalf of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation, because this certainly does not belong to me, but it belongs to a cause, Annette and I are thrilled to accept this because it will inspire all of us with these two beautiful soaring eagles, the Albanian and the American eagle, to continue our fight for human rights.
The American people and Congress are both split about what course of action we should take in the former Yugoslavia. A Newsweek poll finds 49% think the fighting in Bosnia is not a U.S. problem. A Times CNN poll finds 52% agrees with the earlier poll, saying that the U.S. has done enough to try and stop the fighting. What are America's vital interests in Bosnia anyway? Is this a moral question? Do we have a moral obligation to stop the bloodshed, our self-interest aside? What are the risks, both military and political, in using U.S. armed forces? We'll ask our guest, Representative Robert Torricelli, Democrat of New Jersey and member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, president of the Albanian American Civic League, who returned from the former Yugoslavia just last night, and in Washington, Senator John McCain, Republican of Arizona, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator McCain will join us later, and we'll take your phone calls with your questions. Question for you, Robert Torricelli. Are you optimistic about this peace plan?
No, I'm not, John. It'd be my guess that the Serbian ambition is not going to be thwarted by this peace plan. I suspect they're looking for time, and at some point the fighting will start again.
What do you think, former Representative Joseph DioGuardi? Now, you, if I'm correct, you unseated Bella Abzug, did you not?
Back in 1886.
So you must be a very skilled debater.
Well, let's say I have perseverance.
Representative Torricelli doesn't approve of the decision made by President Clinton to use the armed forces of the United States and to lift the embargo inhibiting Bosnia from fighting its own battle against the cruel Serbian aggression. How do you feel about this?
The only thing that will work with the Serbs is resolve. They started in 1989 in Kosovo. 2 million Albanians.
Kosovo is a republic?
Well, it's a declared republic by the people in Kosovo, but not recognized.
Technically a province about the size of what?
Well, about the size of Connecticut, let's say.
Okay, neighboring to Serbia.
Right now, the Serbs consider it part of Serbia.
They consider it?
But it used to have an equal vote with Serbia under the old former Yugoslavia. Very complicated.
2 million people in Kosovo, and 90% are Albanians.
No police Albanian, no judges. The schools have been closed. Everybody fired from their jobs. The ethnic cleansing started there in 1989, and the failed foreign policy you see today started with President Bush, Eagleberger, Baker. Baker had the nerve to certify that the Serbs were in compliance with human rights conventions, and allowed the bill that was going to deny aid to Yugoslavia, the Nichols-D'Amato Amendment, to fail.
Right.
This is what set the stage for what's going on in Bosnia.
Let's tie this back to what's going on in Bosnia and in Serbia. Your feeling is that if the Serbs prevail in Bosnia and these hostilities continue, then the Serbs will do the same thing. They will cleanse Kosovo of the Albanians. Is that correct?
They are already doing it. The ethnic cleansing has started. 500,000 Albanians have already been forced. There are no jobs, no work. They've been put into Western Europe.
Joe, how do you explain this? 90% of the 2 million people, so that's got to be 1.8 million people, are Albanians. The remainder, the tiny percentage remaining, the 10%, are Serbs, correct?
Right, but who has the weapons? 60,000 troops are right now around Kosovo the way they're around Sarajevo. I saw the artillery. They wouldn't let me in. I was at the border. The point is, these people have a gun to their head. And the point is, this is the way the Serbs have been acting since 1989, and they've been getting away with it.
So
the
let
problem
them buy
is
weapons so they can defend themselves.
Congressman, if you would begin. Before I begin, because there's much that I heard, Senator, that I disagree with. From Congressman Rudy's testimony, Congresswoman Bentley's testimony. I mean, obviously, we can be treated to a course in history. That's not the issue here today. The issue today, Senator, is current reality. What is happening? If we had to redraw the map of Europe based on every ethnic group's history, what would we have? We've got to look at what's happening. And in Kosovo today, you have 2 million Albanians that are completely disenfranchised. Every independent group that is allowed to go there, and I say allowed, because many are thrown out. The European Parliament was evicted several times. I've been evicted. Would you believe, Senator, a former U.S. Congressman, one now that's an advocate for a large group of Albanian Americans and these people? I've been to Belgrade 3 times in the past year, Kosovo 3 times. I've been literally evicted from the International Press Center in Belgrade just to express my views. If you thought that you heard a good analysis of the elections, What you should have heard was Mrs. Phyllis Kaminsky, who is here, by the way. She was involved with the National Republican Institute for International Affairs. They'll be issuing a report very shortly on their independent observance of those elections in Serbia and other republics. And she's in the audience, and I saw her moving around quite a bit and disagreeing with what you heard as well. So I would wish that you take her report for the record, even though you may not be able to take her comments today. That is our U.S. agency, AID, and I would hope that we would accept that as an objective report. But we've got 2 million Albanians in this area that today have been reduced to nothing. They have been dismissed from their jobs. They are beaten. They are tortured. They have been killed. There are lists of killings. I just received, and I had to get this by plane yesterday, the latest report dated February 1991. This is the Pristina branch of the Yugoslav Helsinki Committee. This is a litany of horrors, Senator. I don't think there's a group of people in the world today that is treated as badly as 2 million Albanians are in a so-called civilized state that our State Department consistently stands for, called Yugoslavia. And they may have some good reasons from a national security point of view, but let me say, international conventions should never allow any group to be treated this way. And may I give you this for the record, this statement. Also, let me give you for the record, because this is current. This is not 500 years old. This is not ancient history. Here's a report issued just last week by the City Bar Association. Their Human Rights Committee went to Kosova. They prepared an 80-page report with a press release of New York City, the New York City Bar. And I'd like to again put their report, again, a litany of horrors. You've heard about the State Department's country report. I applaud our great Ambassador Zimmerman, Mr. Chairman, for the work he is doing, because that report, for the first time, is an honest assessment of the plight of the ethnic Albanians, and it itself is a litany of horrors. Let me also put on the record, because I received this by an airplane yesterday from Belgrade. This is the Independent Trade Union of Kosovo report of the general economic and social situation after application of repressive measures in the Kosovian companies, etc. February 1991. Not hundreds of years old, not history, today. And I would wish that I would offer this report for the record as well. What we face today is nothing less than an issue of communism versus democracy. We have democratic leaders in Kosovo. In fact, there are 5 democratic parties. They can't freely associate without being harassed or even arrested. Senator Dole told you what happened when he went there. When I went there with Congressman Lantos last June, just for merely expressing our concern, and in some cases outrage at the treatment, even in front of us, I was banned for 5 years. I'm a former U.S. Congressman. Our State Department quietly protested it, but I am still banned. I cannot go, according to the Serbian authorities, back to Yugoslavia to talk about these people. This is the condition that has been imposed on the Albanians today. Let me not go through the litany of horrors, because they're here in my testimony. I've given 8 pages, so let me shift for a minute to an issue of self-determination. Because if you talk about human rights, you must be concerned, where does that lead? Senator, Mr. Chairman, why shouldn't 2 million Albanians have the right of self-determination in the state of Yugoslavia? They are the 3rd largest ethnic group in the country. The Slovenes, lesser people, 1.5 million, have a republic. The Montenegrins, even less than that, have a republic. But yet 2 million Albanians are denied even the thought. In fact, if you go on the streets and use the word republic, you will be arrested on the spot, and you could be imprisoned from 5 to 15 years under the provisions of the Serbian law. You talk about the rule of law today. Go to Kosovo and look at the tanks on the streets today. It is an unholy combination of apartheid. It is the Warsaw Ghetto all over again. It is every ugly stain that anyone could ever imagine, and it's in Europe today. It's in this day and age, and yet very few people see it because the Serbian government doesn't want you to see it. Many of the independent groups have been chased away from seeing it. When Senator Dole came, they had dispersed thousands of people before he arrived, and yet he smelled the tear gas. His press secretary took the video and brought it back. It was literally disgusting. So why shouldn't self-determination for these people especially with the oppression that they've been subjected to for 45 years, why shouldn't that lead to republic status for the Albanians? What is wrong with that? That is the only guarantee that they have against this oppression. Look at the history of this area. They need to enjoy some sort of autonomy, but within the state of Yugoslavia. All responsible leaders that I've met with, Congressman Lantos has met with, Senator Dole, have not heard anyone express that they would like to secede and join with Albania. This is the Serbian propaganda machine. And boys, Mr. Chairman, you can't believe the propaganda machine that the Serbs have. Their Tanjug and Borba and Politica, I know, because I've seen my quotes. But don't listen to me. Look at even recent reports in the press. In fact, there was an article in the press just a little while ago that talked about the truth being compromised, and I'll probably put my hand on it later, but it was in the New York Times. That truth is compromised easily by that Serbian propaganda machine, and it was used against the opposition, even the Serbian opposition, to create a monopoly of power by a Stalinist communist. His name is Slobodan Milosevic. And you know something? It's not bad enough that he's a communist, Mr. Chairman. He's an ardent nationalist. It's the worst of both forms. Usually if you're a communist, and communism has quelled nationalism in many places, it's with the demise of communism that we see resurgence of nationalism. This gentleman combines the worst of both. He's a Stalinist Bolshevik, and he's an ardent nationalist. And he's used Kosovo as his only platform. When he rose to power in the last 10 years, or certainly in the last 2 or 3, his only platform was to recolonize Kosovo. Can you imagine in this day and age using the word recolonization? But that's what he wants to do. If you're a Serb and you move back to Kosovo, you not only get the wage, the government will double the wage. In other words, there are incentives now for Serbs to go back, and they're taking the jobs away from all the Albanians so they leave. This has been a plan that has been a dream of Serbs for years. I remember a memo that I read by Mr. Trebilovic. It was in his plan in 1939 that we must recolonize Kosovo. And they call it their Jerusalem. Well, I understand the importance of it to them, but the Albanians were there before they came. The Slavs came in the 8th to the 9th century. The Albanians were already there. The Albanian people are the remnants of the Illyrian Empire. They've been there for thousands of years. They share nothing with the Slavs. Not their alphabet, not their language, not their culture. And we could see right now, they can't even share a common political denominator because the leaders of the Albanians want democracy. 700,000 have registered with the Democratic Alliance, Dr. Rugova, through their communist cards in the bonfire, and they're not able to vote. They would not vote. They boycotted the elections because they didn't want to dignify the fact that Serbia has been imposing their brand of political self-determination on them. And I think they had every right to do it. So I would tell you, and again, my testimony goes for 3 pages as to why the republic status for Kosovo is a logical conclusion to guarantee their human rights and give these people their self-determination. And finally, let me just talk about State Department policy, Mr. Chairman, because it is misguided. If this policy were a good policy several years ago, I have to tell you today that it is a lousy policy today. And it's based on 3 shaky principles that, again, I go through here. 3 principles. 1, the State Department is tied into the past relationship with Yugoslavia when we needed a broker, when we needed a bridge. We don't need that bridge and broker anymore. 2, as far as the State Department is concerned, we must prevent the dissolution of Yugoslavia under any conditions or at any cost. I don't buy that. And 3, we must not prevent the process of democratization from going forward. These, Mr. Chairman, are their expressed policy items because in a letter where they actively lobbied against the amendment that we were for, that ultimately passed, they cited these 3 reasons in a letter by Assistant Secretary Mullins, I believe, and I had to, for the record, and in front of Republicans and Democrats, Senate and House, argue against all 3, and obviously did it successfully because the amendment did pass. Well, in conclusion, because I know there's a lot that can be said, and I'll offer much of what I have for the record, Mr. Chairman. It is a complex issue. Kosovo is not going to break up Yugoslavia. You saw it in the papers today. It's happening without Kosovo. In fact, if we deal with the issue of Kosovo honestly, it might help in keeping Yugoslavia together. The Albanians want their place in a confederation within Yugoslavia. They really do. And it's a shame that Serbian chauvinism and that this Communist Party boss, Slobodan Milosevic, is imposing his brand of a monopolized political system on the others. There is an apartheid that's been created. Unfortunately, the world does not know about it as well as they know about the apartheid in South Africa. And in a press release that I issued today, Mr. Chairman, I call Kosovo the Kuwait of Europe. Why? It's occupied. There is no question. The Serbs have moved into Kosovo and have assumed every indicia of living, not only economic. The judges are Serbian, the police are Serbian. Everything has been subsumed by the Serbs. So there is, and make no bones about it, occupation today. So I would conclude by saying that we have to question our State Department. We have to question why they inevitably seem to be against any congressional resolution, amendment, or statement. They actively lobby. My feeling, Mr. Chairman, is they should be loudly proclaiming the democracy or the democratic aims of the Albanian people. And if they really believe their own country report, if they have a conscience, they should be working with the leaders in Kosovo in order to give these people self-determination within a confederation so that the experiment of Yugoslavia remain together. I would like to see Yugoslavia remain together, but I don't think it's going to happen based upon what we've read in the press today and based upon what you're going to hear from these other witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Powell.
Thank you very much.
I had to leave Kosovo because I had no opportunities there either to work or live normally. Oppression started in 1989, full-scale oppression of Albanians. And they fired me from the job, as they did with 100 other people who were working with me, but they abolished the parliament. They took over everything there. And then I had no other choice. I just stay there and then wait until someone comes and search your house or at the street and to search you and beat you just for being an Albanian. That, you know, I had no future. I saw no future over there at this moment.
If things start happening in that part of Yugoslavia, then you've got the danger in Macedonia, you've got the danger of the Greeks and the Turks and Bulgaria and Albania. It'd be a much wider conflict. I don't think we could avoid some involvement if it spreads.
So in other words, you do see Kosovo as a kind of key?
Oh, yes. I think it's sort of the linchpin.
And joining us now from New York to talk more about the crisis and the U.S. congressional debate on Kosovo policy is former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi. Mr. DioGuardi is also president of the Albanian American Civic League. Mr. DioGuardi, we're hearing mixed reports. Earlier we heard that it was relatively quiet, and now we're hearing there are mixed instances of some violence. Have you heard from any of the people back there?
In fact, just on the way down to your studios here in New York, I received a call, and I was told that fighting started again in the village of Lyusha, which is one of the 4 villages in this Stranica region. So I think we're going to see a continuation of this. You know, we've seen how Mr. Milosevic responds because of our experience in Bosnia. Unless the West is prepared to take swift action, I've heard the strong words in Congress and Mrs. Madeleine Albright's strong words, but unless we're prepared to take swift action, you will not see Mr. Milosevic back off.
What do you mean by swift action?
Well, we just had a congressional hearing, and I was delighted to see that a hearing that was called on Bosnia, and it was because in great part of the efforts of our Albanian American Civic League that we shifted the emphasis of that hearing to Kosovo. And there was a lot of tough talk from Ambassador Gelbard and from the administration. But talk does not work. In terms of swift action, we need to do what we did in Bosnia 2 years too late.
In other words, you're talking about military.
Well, we need to establish a no-fly zone immediately. We know that they're using heavily armed helicopters. There's no reason for that kind of force to be used against innocent civilians. We should be ringing the border of Yugoslavia right now with NATO troops in Macedonia, in Bulgaria, in Montenegro. There's no reason why we shouldn't show Mr. Milosevic that the West is resolved to see this conflict contained and to see the political rights of the Albanian people, long-suffering Albanian people of Kosovo, finally addressed.
In your view, where is the holdup? Is it in Congress or elsewhere?
Well, it appears that our State Department is thinking long and hard about the actions. We like the tone of the statements made by the Secretary of State and by Ambassador Gelbard, but there should be no secret as to what works with Mr. Milosevic. In fact, he should be on the list of war criminals in The Hague. Why we have embraced the person who started the Balkan conflict back in Kosovo in 1989, the war in Slovenia in 1991, and then Croatia, and then Bosnia, and put him at the peace table at the Dayton Accords, I don't know. It was Congressman Dana Rohrabacher who said to Ambassador Gelbard, is Mr. Milosevic, and he said it euphemistically, on the list of war criminals? And Gelbard said no, and then Rohrabacher says, but we're dealing with all of his buddies who are war criminals, Mr. Karadzic, Mr. Milosevic. We have to understand that you cannot trust Mr. Milosevic. Look at his actions, and you'll see what he's about to do in Kosovo.
Okay, I can tell you this, that the Pentagon is saying now that absolutely no consideration is given, or is being given, to sending in troops either from Canada or the United States.
Well, we already have a force in Macedonia. I can't believe that they're not considering right now to expand that force, that protection force made up now of U.S. troops and Norwegian troops. I believe it totals about 600. It seems to me that the only answer right now is to show resolve. We didn't show it for 2 years in Bosnia, and we lost 200,000 people, and we had a conflagration there second to none.
Let me ask you this. The ministers of the European Union are suggesting that further sanctions should be imposed in Belgrade. Is that going to work?
Sanctions don't seem to work with Mr. Milosevic. That's what the hearing was all about. We did get a very tough resolution. It was made even tougher because of the efforts of the Albanian American Civic League that represents the concerns of 400,000 ethnic Albanians here in America. But sanctions will not be enough. We need to show resolve. We should move an aircraft carrier off the coast of Montenegro, let it stay there. We should ring Serbia with troops, let them stay there. If we see one move, and don't forget, Ralph, 2 presidents drew a line in the sand. President Bush on the way out and President Clinton on the way in said if there's any military or paramilitary action in Kosovo, we would move swiftly. That question was put to Mr. Gelbard, Ambassador Gelbard, and he said that foreign policy declaration is still in effect.
Do you think that kind of activity worked in Bosnia?
Absolutely. The only time we saw the Serbian regime come to the table to try to resolve something was when they knew the West was ready to act.
We only have a few more moments. Let me ask you this. It's to many people, it's a very, very confusing story, and you have to go back into history. How did the ethnic Albanians get into this situation in the first place?
It is a very confusing story, but let me say this. The ethnic Albanians of Kosovo were there for over 5,000 years. You can't believe the Serbian propaganda machine. They did not move to Kosovo or Macedonia or Montenegro. This is one half of the divided nation of Albanians. You have 3.5 million Albanians in the state of Albania and 3.5 just outside its borders. Okay. And they were there.
Joseph DioGuardi, thank you very much for sharing your views and perspective with us today.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll call this hearing to order. We expect the arrival of some other senators soon when their conferences, lunches break up. But we welcome you all. Today, the Foreign Relations Committee has convened to discuss the crisis in Kosovo and its potential ramifications on stability throughout the region. Our first panel will consist of Ambassador Robert Gelbard, the Special Representative of the President and the Secretary of State for implementation of the Dayton Accords. After we hear from Ambassador Gelbard, the committee will welcome Mr. James Hooper from the Balkan Institute, Mr. John Fox of the Open Society Institute, and former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, who currently is the volunteer president of the Albanian American Civic League. I appreciate the willingness of all of our witnesses to appear before the committee this afternoon. I confess that I'm deeply concerned about the situation in Kosovo today. Since February of this year, approximately 150 people have been killed in a particularly appalling fashion. And the Serbian police have attacked and murdered innocent women and children in their effort to crack down on the Kosovar Albanian separatist movement. The Albanian community in Kosovo has shown remarkable reserve in their pursuit of the autonomy that was revoked in 1989 and 90. But as we have all seen, that patience has worn thin. The gathering strength of the Kosovo Liberation Army in their quest for an independent Kosovo and their violent tactics to achieve their goals leads me to believe that things in Kosovo may yet get even worse. The Serbs have shown in recent months that they are more than willing to use overwhelming force in response to separatist activity in Kosovo. And I do not expect that that attitude to change. I sincerely hope that our administration does not consider President Milosevic's role in the Bosnian peace process, however great or small, as justification for leniency with regard to his abhorrent behavior in Kosovo. The contact group established to coordinate policy on the conflict in the former Yugoslavia has met several times since the violence in Kosovo broke out in February. Despite statements of outrage and condemnation from the contact group, the Serbs have continually ignored its limited demands. President Milosevic thus far has successfully exploited the historical and economic interests in Serbia that shade the views of some of our friends in Europe. Though there are merits to using the contact group in dealing with the situation in Kosovo, at some point in the future the contact group proves to be unsuccessful at contributing to the resolution of the conflict. Then the United States must pursue an appropriate policy unilaterally. I realize the policy challenges facing the United States and the international community in responding to the Kosovo crisis. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has used strong words of warning to President Milosevic, but I must say the direction of the United States policy on this issue is unfortunately unclear. As I mentioned earlier, the contact group has been ineffective at forcing Mr. Milosevic to cease his terrorist tactics in Kosovo. Given the potential this conflict has to spread to the rest of the Balkans and beyond, even involving our NATO allies, Greece and Turkey, I think it is critical for the administration to clearly state its policy on this question. In December 1992, then President Bush delivered an unequivocal warning in a letter to President Milosevic that the United States was prepared to intervene militarily if Serbia attacked the ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. President Clinton repeated this so-called Christmas warning after he took office in 1993. It would serve the interests in furthering public debate on the issue if, Ambassador Gelbard, you will publicly state what this warning consists of and whether this will continue to be U.S. policy. I look forward to discussing these issues and other questions with all of our distinguished witnesses before us.
Serb special police, paramilitaries, were sent in to reinforce the local police in very large numbers and conduct a cleanup operation, as they called it. Supported by attack helicopters and heavy weapons, the operation lasted for a day. The total number killed by regular and special police was some 80 people, mostly non-combatants, including large numbers of children and women. Though the Serb and FRY governments describe this as a police action, no democratic country in the world would allow this kind of behavior by police to go unpunished. Since that time, the Belgrade government has tripled the number of special police, essentially paramilitary units or internal troops, as communist countries have called them in the past, deployed to Kosovo, and have recently deployed Yugoslav Army, VJ, infantry, armor, and artillery units on the borders and to key hotspots in the interior. This represents a substantial escalation, and the deployments on the border with Albania are particularly troubling. Nations do have a right to protect their borders. However, Belgrade's stated desire to prevent or stop cross-border weapons smuggling, carried out by small groups of people through remote mountain passes, does not track with the large-scale deployment of tanks and artillery to the border. Moreover, Belgrade has issued a threatening public statement accusing the government of Albania of conspiring to undermine the territorial integrity of the FRY. We in the contact group have warned the FRY against staging any cross-border operations into Albania or Macedonia. In response to Belgrade's use of excessive force and the lack of movement toward unconditional dialogue, the UN Security Council adopted on March 31st an arms embargo against the FRY, blocking planned arms purchases by Belgrade. This embargo also prohibits the sale or provision of weapons or other equipment or training for groups engaged in terrorist activities. Introduction of further weapons into the region, either to Belgrade or to extremist groups, will only increase the violence and make it more difficult to bring about negotiations and a political solution to the already bitter dispute over Kosovo's status. Even in the face of provocation, however, governments have a greater responsibility for ensuring that the rule of law is respected and the rights of its citizens protected than any armed extremist groups. Belgrade's failure and refusal to uphold that responsibility has made Kosovo an international problem. They are the ones who have internationalized Kosovo. And we and our allies have no intention of standing by and ignoring continued repression and escalation of violence into war.
Mr. Ambassador, before we hear from Senator Biden, I must ask you, is there a Christmas warning that is a policy of this government? And are there any steps being taken to implement that warning?
The United States continues to work on all possible options that are available regarding our desire to find a peaceful solution in Kosovo. All options are on the table and available. We have not ruled anything out. President Milosevic is well aware of that.
Seems to me that history shows that Mr. Milosevic will respond to force, and that force used early may well prevent a great deal of difficulty later, as we've learned in Bosnia. I just wonder if perhaps we ought to be more visible with preparations backing up a Christmas warning.
Well, first, President Milosevic and his government, I think, are very well aware of U.S. government policy overall on all these issues. And as I said, we continue to be prepared to exercise every avenue possible to try to find a way to get a peaceful solution. I fully agree with what you said in your opening statement, Mr. Chairman, about the way this appalling situation has escalated. In my frequent visits to Belgrade and to Pristina over the last several months, I have been trying, and representatives of other governments have been trying, to make every effort to bring the two sides together. We are continuing to do so, and we continue to try to find every way possible to get this to happen. There are some sensitive aspects to U.S. policy, and I'd be happy to talk with you and other members of the Senate privately about some of these.
We're about to hear from a very distinguished former congressperson and a person who is at this present status is a spokesperson for Albanians in the diaspora, Albanian Americans here, and ostensibly others as well. Congressman, welcome.
Nice to be here, Senator. I recall being here in this very position, facing you on, I guess it was February 1991, just over 7 years ago, when you were concerned, really concerned about what was going to happen in Yugoslavia. And I remember ending that testimony by saying that I didn't think that Yugoslavia was going to stay together. We're all hoping that it would. The United States was banking its foreign policy on it. And all we heard during that meeting was how Albanian terrorists and separatists and the quest for greater Albania was going to destroy Yugoslavia. And now we see what destroyed Yugoslavia, which was there all the time, the quest for greater Serbia. Slobodan Milosevic, when he walked in to Kosovo in 1987 and brutally occupied it and took away its legitimate status as one of the 8 juridical units of the Confederal Republic of Yugoslavia, where Kosovo had an equal vote with Serbia. It rotated every year. Created, in less than a few years, not only apartheid, but a Warsaw Ghetto that still exists in the heart of Europe today. I wouldn't be concerned, Senator, about greater Albania. I'd be concerned that we've already legitimized ethnic cleansing by creating a phony republic called Srpska. It never existed. It's there. Why? Because Slobodan Milosevic wanted it. The person who in the news last Sunday is targeted by his former friend, Karadzic, in a book saying he's about to now go to Hague and he's going to turn state's evidence, and he's pointing the finger at his friend Slobodan Milosevic as the architect of some of the most brutal, unbelievable atrocities since the Nazi era. We don't have to worry about greater Albania. We have to worry about what I was worried about back in February of 1991. And at that time, I can only wave in front of you a Serbian version of this. I'm now going to give you the English translation. This is what Slobodan Milosevic has been weaned on. Here it is, The Expulsion of the Albanians, a paper presented by his mentor, a professor, former minister of the Yugoslav government, Vasil Tribilovic, in Belgrade, March 7, 1937. If you want to see what happened in Bosnia, what's happening in Kosovo today, read word for word, line by line, exactly what's going on, their MO, their modus operandi. Shelling villages, burning them down, getting rid of Albanians at all costs, because this is territory they want. He will not abandon this. And as we keep waffling in this body and in the State Department, he will just go and take more and more and more and more. He bluffed his way right through Bosnia, and he got Srpska. He's bluffing his way right now. He knows that there's no real resolve with this Christmas warning. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing. Sorry to start before you walked in. But he sees and senses the waffling already. He sees strong words on the part of Madeleine Albright. Then Madeleine Albright is muffled by Sandy Berger. And then we have questions coming up in Gilman's hearing a few weeks ago about the Christmas warning and a very lukewarm response by Ambassador Gelbard. We have to meet with you in executive session, and you heard it again today. No direct response. Don't you think Slobodan Milosevic is hearing those responses? Don't you think he's ready to do more and more because he sees that the greatest superpower in the world has lost its resolve, has a foreign policy which has abandoned the principles upon which this country was formed? Our foreign policy should be based on fundamental human rights. That's one of the key determinants of foreign policy. We have today in Kosovo some of the most egregious examples of violations of those human rights. In fact, Senator Biden, during that hearing that you held, and it was a wonderful hearing, it was the first time that you got all groups together to talk about the problem, I had to fly in reports from the Council on Human Rights from Pristina and other places, litanies of horror. I don't have to do that today. You know why? All you have to do is read your own U.S. country report from the State Department. Here it is, the 1997 edition. But if you read the last 5 years, you can't believe the litany of horrors in here against the Albanian people of Kosovo. What are we waiting for? How many people have been killed and brutally tortured and detained and disappeared? Every criteria they use has been violated. Why is there such a disconnect between those egregious violations and our professed adherence to human rights when it comes to foreign policy? Is there another deal in the wind? Perhaps you didn't ask the right questions to Ambassador Gelbard. Are we placating Russia for some reason? They're always there supporting their first cousins, the Serbs. That's where the Serbs came from in the 6th century AD, from the Ukraine. We know they're blood brothers, or at least blood cousins. They're always there supporting them. But what has Russia done for us in Iran, Iraq, and China, and so many other places? They don't support us. Why are we giving such deference to Russia? Why are we even considering a contact group at this point, including Russia? This is an issue that should be led by the United States of America in the NATO milieu, without Russia. This is where it belongs. That is what solved Bosnia. And the only reason today Bosnia is not like Kosovo, Mr. Chairman and Senator, is that we have troops there. Who are we kidding? When are we going to wake up? Another key element of our foreign policy that's been abandoned is that we will do everything to preserve the security of a vital area like the Balkans in Europe. And if you look at international law and how it defines where you have a state of belligerency, you look at what the neighboring countries are saying about what's going on there. Every one of them is using language which is at the edge. Recently, the foreign minister of Greece said Kosovo is like a hand grenade. If it goes any further, it's going to explode. A Turkish spokesman of the foreign policy said something similar. I have it right here someplace. Stated that the Kosovo crisis, if unchecked, could destabilize the Balkan region and therefore European security. NATO condemned the excessive use of force by the Yugoslav army in Kosovo and said that the North Atlantic Council is profoundly concerned about the deterioration of the situation there and was considering, quote, possible further means to maintaining stability in view of the risk of escalating the conflict in the region. On April 27th, a spokesman from the United States State Department said that if the contact group members did not agree to a new sanctions package, the United States would act unilaterally. The United States reiterated the UN and the contact group's call for the immediate withdrawal of the special police units, which are nothing more than the Yugoslav army from Kosovo, and the need for unconditional dialogue. And yet, when the contact group met in Rome on April 29th, the United States capitulated to a weak proposal for more sanctions under pressure, especially from Russia, which, as I said before, has gone out of its way not to support us in dealing with Iran, Iraq, China, and many other areas. It is obvious that the sanctions are not really an issue to Belgrade, which has already survived 6 years of very tough economic sanctions. In the meantime, How many Kosovar Albanians have to be killed? We talk about negotiations. We talk about so many things. No conditions. But when do we get to the point where we say, hey, thousands of Albanians are being killed? Are these negotiations working? Should we now learn from the experience we had in Bosnia that Slobodan Milosevic only understands one thing, and that's the use of force or the threat thereof? In the meantime, they will only serve, these sanctions will only serve to bolster nationalistic fervor on Mr. Milosevic's behalf. Only resolve will work, Mr. Chairman, and that will have to come from the only superpower left in the world, the United States of America, taking the lead with our NATO allies. In conclusion, the 2 million ethnic Albanians of Kosovo, who comprise more than 90% of the population there, have no human, economic, or political rights of any kind. Slobodan Milosevic has illegally and brutally occupied Kosovo now for almost 10 years. I'm not going to go through the history of Kosovo, but I have a 3-page addendum to my testimony, and by the way, I'd like to offer the entire testimony for the record. I'm giving an abbreviated form of it.
Happy to receive it.
But when you look at Kosovo, it's not a new story. Kosovo was part of Albania until 1916 and 17, as was that population of Albanians in Macedonia and southeastern Montenegro. That's why they're all contiguous. The line was if you drew the line around 7 million Albanians today, you have the former state of Albania that came out of Turkish occupation. They're not looking to change those borders. The only one looking to change borders is Slobodan Milosevic. But what they want is some peace in their lives, some self-determination, some ability to raise their families, to be who they want to be, and to save their national identity. And what we see right now is ethnic cleansing all over again in Kosovo, the way we saw at Bosnia. It's time for our State Department to understand that loose talk that brands the victims as terrorists for defending themselves, their families, their property, and I'll even add their sacred honor. It's important to Albanians the way it was important to our founding fathers, Mr. Chairman and Senator. This only serves to give the green light to the real terrorists, Slobodan Milosevic and his henchmen, who are massacring innocent people as we sit here speaking. It is time for the United States to stand up for its own principles and demand compliance with international human rights conventions before more Albanians are needlessly slaughtered and a new Balkan war is triggered, this time involving neighboring Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Turkey. It is time for Congress to stand up and voice its outrage at a foreign policy in the Balkans that has obviously failed to preserve peace and security in this vital region of the world. It is time for the United States to back up its tough words with concrete actions, such as declaring a no-fly zone in Kosovo, as we did in Bosnia. What is wrong with that? They're using these heavily armed helicopters right now to level villages. 2, ringing Serbia's border with NATO troops and moving an aircraft carrier off the coast of Montenegro. These actions would not only reaffirm our resolve to stop the escalation of the conflict in Kosovo, but I believe would lead to a lasting peace for the Albanian people and all ethnic groups in the Balkans. I would like to also give to the record, Mr. Chairman, a book that I prepared a few years ago called The Agony of Kosovo. It's a good reference book. It has 3 pages of index material because it shows what this body has done since 1987, this body in the House. And it shows that what we're talking about here today is nothing new. It's just escalating, and our foreign policy is nothing new. We're still waffling. What we did in Bosnia, for some reason, we're reluctant to do in Kosovo. And when we talk about the Albanian people as fundamentalists and terrorists, let's not forget what my good friend Ben Gilman did a couple of years ago at the Holocaust Museum in memorializing the Albanian people, the state of Albania, as the only nation in Europe that didn't give one Jew to the Nazis. That's now part of the Yad Vashem in Israel and our museum here. And this book was written by an American Jew, to memorialize that fact, and I want to leave you the letter that Ben Gilman sent to members of this body in the House to say that. It's a shame that we cannot do something to save these people, these terrorist groups that come from Belgrade, special police that are really criminals let out of jail, and they're given police uniforms and army uniforms, running into homes. They know that the Albanian people save their money usually with gold. They're going there to get bounty, to get currency. They kill the families on the spot. In Drenica, how many women and children were killed in their living rooms and bedrooms? We're still not allowed to go there. There is a mass grave someplace. We have testimony from the women. They heard their men and their husbands and young sons screaming. They were taken away, 200. There's a mass grave there someplace. We'll find it sooner or later, as we did in Bosnia. But what are we waiting for? Is this the United States that we want to represent? A country that stands on the side as a brutal dictator with state-inspired terrorism, brutalizes a group of 2 million people who are defenseless today in Kosovo. And what's wrong with a national liberation movement, Senator, when there's no one there to defend you? What's wrong with that? What are they going to wait for? There are many articles written about when enough is enough. And there was one just recently that I read by a professor from Tufts University. His name is Hurst Honden. And he said there are 2 instances in which secession, I'm not saying that they're saying that, but even secession, as we did 221 years ago, should be supported by the international community. The first occurs when massive, discriminatory human rights violations approaching the scale of genocide are being perpetrated. If there is no likelihood of a change in the attitude of the central government, or if the majority population supports the repression, as we just saw in that phony referendum that Slobodan Milosevic just held in Serbia, he doesn't want any international intervention, secession may be the only effective remedy for the besieged group. This is international law. A second possible exception might find the right of secession if reasonable demands for local self-government or minority rights have been arbitrarily rejected by a central government, even without accompanying large-scale violence. And it goes on. So this is not an easy issue. It wasn't easy in 1991. It's not easy today. But let's not brand the victims as the terrorists. Let's not talk about Greater Albania, because that's not on the table. What's on the table constantly for 50 years, certainly in the last 10, is the quest for Greater Serbia, and we seemed very willing to give Mr. Milosevic what he wants. I hope we're not going to do the same in Kosovo as we did in Bosnia. It would be a tragedy of the highest proportions, and I think would only lead to a very destabilized Balkans and a greater war later on. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, all of you. I must confess I'm uncertain as to what the policy of the administration is in terms of a Christmas message and what, if anything, we're doing to prepare to enforce such a policy. I hope to find out some answers myself on that, whether private or otherwise. But the Congressman has laid out some specific proposals that we declare a no-fly zone, ring the area with NATO troops, and park a aircraft carrier off the coast. I wonder if either of you two would care to comment on that, how long it would be, how effective it would be, and whether we ought to be doing it unilaterally or involving all of NATO, and what spillover there might be towards peacekeeping in Bosnia.
Senator, I think that the only way to, there's a lot of dissension now within NATO, and I think that's because the United States, the Clinton administration, has been unwilling to exercise proper leadership on this issue. What I think we are advocating, what Congressman DioGuardi is advocating, is conflict prevention, the kind of military measures that are credible enough to prevent the kind of conflict that will require even greater military measures, greater risks, greater burdens, or more disastrous consequences if we don't react.
Congressman has raised the issue, the overlay of Russia's influence on the Serbia or alliance with Serbia. And I wonder if either of you have a comment on that. What do you think, how does that impact the American action?
I think the refusal of the administration to take this to NATO has quite a bit to do with that fact. And in fact, I think some of our European allies are putting a higher priority on keeping Russia as part of a lowest common denominator diplomatic effort than they are to really facing up to the fundamentals here. Russia has not been friendly to peaceful outcomes in the Balkans and the southern Balkans. I think it would be better for the administration to question why Russia insists on collecting war criminals and pariahs as its clients at this late date, and why they can't find some other Serbs to ally themselves with. There's a difference between a pro-Serb policy and a pro-Serbs policy. There are a lot of Serbs, there are a lot of moderate Serbs. There's not just one Serb or one handful of Serbs. And I think a good deal could be done to remind Moscow of that. I think it would be more credible still if the U.S. had a record of supporting democratic forces in the former Yugoslavia, which it decidedly does not. We tend to take it as it lays and then wonder why there's no Lech Walesa or Václav Havel.
Here's my question, and this is to you, Congressman, is in terms of where you think, if you have to pick a horse here, do you suggest that we, the United States, use all our influence and whatever force we're willing to use to deal with and promote and support the Democratic League of Kosovo or the Kosovo Liberation Army? Because right now, they ain't in tandem. Why don't we make the question a lot more simple? Why don't we look at international law, look at a population of 2 million people that is being brutalized every day? Because it's useful to look at reality.
Well, but reality is also, Senator, that you raised the issue of, well, who is this George Washington that we want to find in Belgrade so we can solve the problem? We may have to wait a long time. But in the meantime, I agree, we cannot let these people be brutalized and killed every day. I think there are things we have to do right now. And we have to face Slobodan Milosevic in the eye, as we did in Bosnia, and say, get every one of those VJ troops out of Kosovo. And if you don't do it, we're going to take some action. Now,
what action? We're going to bomb, right?
What are we doing?
Physical force.
Yeah, but wait a minute.
I'm not suggesting we shouldn't. I want to know what action
you just said before, the arguments you made before, the same arguments that I heard I was on a panel with Bob Torricelli and Senator McCain back in 1992 or 3 or 4 in the McLaughlin show, and they were saying the same thing. But we did something, didn't we? We waited 3 years. Sooner or later, we got the resolve, motif, and we said something has to be done. No. Why is this any different?
Well, no, it is different because, no, it's not different. I just want to know what you suggest, because back then, when I was in your position, I was suggesting we bomb Belgrade. I was suggesting that we send American pilots in and blow up all the bridges on the Drina. I was suggesting we take out his oil supplies. I was suggesting very specific action.
And isn't it interesting that we didn't have to go that far to begin the solution in Bosnia?
Isn't it interesting that about 200,000 people were killed in the meantime by the time they did it?
Yes. And that's going to happen in Kosovo.
That's why I want to know what you're suggesting now.
What we have to do right now is to enforce international law. We have war criminals in Belgrade. We're dealing with one right now. I said that article before. I have a copy of it right here. Here it is. It was in the Gannett papers on Sunday. There's Slobodan Milosevic, side by side Mr. Karadzic, who's now got a book coming out pointing the finger at him for all these atrocities in Bosnia. Why aren't we picking him up?
Because the French, he's in the French quarter, and the French let him walk around. That's why.
It seems to me that we've got a double standard here. If we're going to be the great United States of America, standing up for oppressed people, and I believe we can do that without sending military all over the world. Let's pick up the war criminals in Belgrade. We know who they are. We know where they are. And number 2, let's tell Mr. Milosevic, get every troop out of there. You know why? It's not because we want him to, because we like it. He is now on the brink of creating a Balkan war. You know the problems we have between Greece and Turkey. You know how fragile Macedonia is. You know that we right now have 600 troops on the border in Macedonia. What are we waiting for? If he keeps doing this, all he's doing is raising the temperature, and as the Greek foreign minister said, the hand grenade will explode and the Balkans will explode. Well, we have no choice. Let's do something now than have to do 20 times more later on.
The purpose of calling this hearing was simply to focus the debate and get some minds to working. Part of the role of the U.S. Senate is advising, not just consenting. And hopefully we have the attention of our government, and we can stimulate some resolve. So we thank you all for participating. And with that, we are adjourned.
Take a quick look at that.